Welcome to week 2 of Purpose-Driven Legacy. I pray the reading and preparation for this week blessed you. I have a question for you. Is there power in our testimony? Let's see what the Word says about it. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have observed and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life that life yielded, and we have seen it, and we testify and declare to you the eternal life that was with the Father and was revealed to us, what we have seen and also declare to you, so that you may also have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. We are writing these things so that our joy may be complete. 1 John 1:4. So I ask again, is there power in our testimony? Consider this. If the disciples had not shared their personal experiences with us, would we be here today? Yes, there is power in sharing our testimony. I must share my testimony and journey to convey my perspective. It's the most authentic way I know to bridge the gap and articulate the unique viewpoint that has been placed upon my heart. Sharing my journey is immensely personal and vulnerable. Still, it is a path I believe the Lord has set me upon, urging me to explore the concept of legacy through the experience of my own lenses, so that you may benefit from it and build a godly legacy. This is my testimony, the journey that brought me to where I am today. And my story doesn't conclude here. I grew up in a loving Christian household deeply rooted in ministry. Many of my family members were actively involved in various aspects of it. One notable figure among them was my great-uncle, Rex Humbard, a renowned televangelist whose ministry, at its prime, I have been told, reached more people globally than even Billy Graham. His legacy was genuinely remarkable. Also on my mother's side, my grandfather, affectionately known as Poppy, was a full-time ordained minister with the Assemblies of God. My uncle Alan served as an Episcopal priest and counselor, and my mother, gifted with a remarkably anointed voice, recorded several gospel albums during her youth under the Humbard label. On my father's side, my father, my Aunt Pat, my Uncle Sam, my cousins Sammy and April and her husband, and my Uncle Mike are all, or were all, ordained ministers with the Assemblies of God. My Uncle Mike was a minister and rabbi with extensive knowledge of Hebrew and Greek origins, and my Uncle Sam is one of the most well-read, intelligent, and godly men I have ever known. Even those family members who didn't pursue full-time ministry were actively involved in worship and various ministries throughout their lives. I share these family connections to emphasize that I hail from a lineage of devoted Christ followers, all of whom have positively influenced my life and the lives of so many. I want to begin with a vivid childhood memory that's etched in my mind. My grandfather, Poppy, served as the pastor of a church in Venice, Florida for many years. When I was a young child, that church building felt immense. At the back of the stage were these large green curtains with an opening in the center, concealing a hallway with rooms at each end. These rooms served as classrooms for the children's church and Royal Rangers. Behind those curtains on both sides were a couple of green and yellow couches. During the church service, I often found myself on those couches, clutching drumsticks in my hands, a drum thrown in front of me. With unwavering enthusiasm, I would enthusiastically accompany the worship team. Listening to the music, I would try my best to replicate every drum beat. My father would be playing the piano, harmonizing beautifully with my mother. Both were gifted with incredible voices. Meanwhile, my grandmother would gracefully play the organ or the vibraharp, and Poppy, with his guitar, would join in. Occasionally, my Uncle Danny, my greatest hero, would visit and take his place behind the drums. His drumming skills were awe-inspiring, and I aspired to be like him. At a certain point early in my childhood, we relocated about an hour north to Tampa because my dad had taken a job managing a Radio Shack near MacDill Air Force Base. My mom worked in the same shopping center and managed the Sears surplus store a few storefronts away. From my young perspective, those years held a special charm. Radio Shack was a treasure trove of the most excellent RC cars, computers, and video games, while Sears stocked all the G.I. Joes and Transformers a kid could dream of. We didn't attend church regularly, and I recall visiting various churches intermittently. Amid the backdrop of my toy-filled world, my parents' relationship was strained, marked by frequent arguments. As a young child, I remained blissfully unaware of the unfolding turmoil around me. Then, one fateful day, everything unraveled. It's a memory etched in my mind as vividly as if it happened yesterday. My sister and I eagerly assisted my mom in making homemade donuts, planning to surprise our dad at his workplace. His return from one of his monthly business trips to Orlando thrilled us. We packed up everything and headed to the store to deliver our surprise. I can still see my mother's face to this day when she walked in and discovered that he was with the woman with whom he had been having an affair. I remember the tears in her eyes as she said, "Let's go." I cried because I wanted to see my daddy, not understanding that he had been having an affair with another woman for some time. Later, I learned that all those supposed work trips were excuses to spend weekends with his mistress. And just like that, my parents were suddenly divorced and my world was turned upside down. Shortly after the divorce, my father married her and we moved back to Venice, Florida with my mom. My mom eventually remarried and we relocated to Sarasota, Florida with my new stepdad. With time, the wounds from the past began to heal and God's grace shone through. I always felt the love of both parents, and as the years passed, I grew to love and respect my stepmom and stepdad. I also started to notice how well my parents got along with each other, a bond that remains strong to this day. My dad regularly visited. We saw him every Thursday and spent every other weekend with him. During this time, he became involved in a church in Brandon, Florida, taking on a role in worship leadership. He placed a keyboard on stage next to him, though it wasn't connected to anything except a small amp for me to learn to play alongside him and the band. When we were home with my mom, I'd return from school and spend hours playing the drums with my boombox to its maximum volume. Interestingly, the drums were the same set that had once been at my papi's church when I was a kid. He gave them to me, and I poured my heart into playing them over the years. My sister and I spent the summer with my dad between my 9th and 10th grade years of high school. He and I spent most of the summer jamming in a small bedroom he used as a music room. He played the keys while I played along on the drums. One memorable Wednesday night, the church's regular drummer couldn't attend the service. My dad said, "Dusty, sit down at the drum kit and give me a beat." I must have done a decent job that night because from then on, I found myself behind the drum set and over time I became quite proficient at it. That summer, as all boys do, I had a few crushes on a couple of girls I met in the youth group and discovered the most beautiful and fun girl I had ever met. It's funny how God's plan unfolds. I can't help but laugh as I type this. I had been talking to one girl and I remember going to her house to watch a movie. That night, though, I sensed she wasn't interested in pursuing a relationship with me. While hanging out at her home, I found that her sister and I got along remarkably well. That night, she gave me the classic, "Hey, I can't be in a relationship right now because I need to focus on Jesus" line that so many youth group boys have gotten over the years. As the summer ended and as I entered my sophomore year of high school, I was torn between staying with my dad, where I had made some great friends at church, and returning to my mom's house, where I had no friends. It was a tough decision, and I worried about hurting my mom in the process, but she loved me so much that she wanted nothing more than for me to be happy. Shortly after moving back to my dad's house, I started talking to the most beautiful girl in the world, who happened to be the little sister of the girl I had tried to date earlier, and she became the love of my life. The Air Force years. I joined the U.S. Air Force in Sep 1995, and after basic training and tech school, I was stationed at Barksdale AFB in Louisiana. In June of 1997, I married the love of my life, Sandra. She graduated from high school one weekend, and the following weekend, we were married, packed up our stuff, and were off to Shreveport. Joining the Air Force was one of my better decisions, as it gave me the discipline, order, and stability required to provide for my family. The skills and education I acquired in those years set us on a path to financial stability, allowing my wife to stay home and raise 3 wonderful, God-loving children. As of the date I wrote this, we had been married for over 26 years and have 3 children and 3 granddaughters. Even though those were some very challenging years, we made it through. God has been so good to our family. After my military service, we returned home and bought our first house in Riverview, Florida. We attempted to reconnect with our childhood church, only to discover it no longer resonated with us. We felt the need to seek guidance from the Lord, and during this season, He led us to a remarkable Spirit-filled church where we formed strong bonds of friendship with families we knew from the old church. I became actively involved in the worship team, while Sandra took on a role in the nursery while pregnant with our second child, Leah. One Friday evening, we visited a new church that my dad and stepmom had recently begun attending, and we immediately felt a calling to be a part of this startup process. I met with our pastor and shared that we felt called to join the new church, but requested that he be the one to dedicate our daughter, Leah, who was just a few months old at the time. His response left a profound impact on me. He said, "Dustin, I would be honored to dedicate your little one. I want you to know that it has been a real pleasure shepherding your family during this season, and you are only mine to shepherd until the Lord calls you into something greater." There was no pressure to stay or bolster his congregation, which was remarkable. The new church was vibrant and full of passionate individuals devoted to serving God. The congregation had outgrown its building. Every service was packed with people eager to worship. The worship experience was incredible, the messages were inspiring, and it felt like a spiritual home. During this time, we formed deep and lasting friendships with people whom we remain in close contact with today. These friends are the very individuals I want to share my legacy with. The little church's vibrancy became so well known locally that a large megachurch in Brandon, Florida, just 20 minutes up the road, which had recently lost its pastor, expressed interest in having our pastor become their new leader. His response was remarkable. He would not leave us behind. Instead, we embarked on a journey to merge two churches into a new season with a new identity. While some challenges were involved in merging two churches, I felt it the most where I actively served in the integration of two worship teams. Both teams were exceptional teams, comprised of talented musicians and singers. But when they were meshed together, it was tough to establish order. In the first few weeks, our stage resembled a modern, large symphony orchestra with multiple guitarists, drummers, keyboardists, percussionists, and singers. Over time, we established rotations and settled into a fantastic worship team. I learned a lot in those years and became an exceptional drummer and bass player. I knew how good I had gotten, and it became my identity. When introducing myself to someone new, I would say, "I'm Dustin, I'm the drummer." Although I didn't emphasize the word "the" to them, in my head I was saying that I was the drummer. I wanted to be the best and was willing to put in the time to do it. To say I was arrogant is an understatement, whether it showed in my outward expressions or not. People started to notice how good I had gotten and would often compliment and give me accolades on my abilities as a musician. I was beginning to get some serious recognition for my talents, and I liked it. I thought I had everything figured out and would finish every weekend thinking I had given everything I had in the tank to the Lord through my excellent performance. A few years into our time in the Tampa Bay area, the job market started to decline. I worked for several companies consecutively, which were eventually bought out and closed down. Finding work became increasingly challenging. Fortunately, an opportunity arose for me to regain my security clearance, which I knew would open up numerous job prospects with the government. However, it meant relocating, a tough decision given our strong ties to family, friends, and church. In March of 2010, we ultimately decided to move. I anticipated it would take a year or two to regain the clearance and promised Sandra that we would return home once I secured it. Before leaving, I met with the worship team at our church and expressed my intention to take the lessons and experiences I had gained there with me and replicate them elsewhere. Looking back, it turned out to be one of the most unknowing statements I have ever made, as I had no idea what God had in store for our lives. And so we embarked on our journey to Charleston, South Carolina. I went ahead first so the kids could complete the school year, but after about a month, we all missed each other so much that we decided to commit and move the entire family. When the family arrived in our new location, Sandra and I felt it was essential to get involved in a church as soon as possible to make some friends. We initially tried a few larger churches, similar to the one we left behind, but couldn't establish a meaningful connection. Disheartened, we explored different options and enrolled the kids in tumbling classes at a local gymnastics center to keep them engaged. On our first visit to the gym, we encountered a friendly hippie couple in the lobby. The husband sported a long ZZ top-style beard, and the wife had long hair adorned with flowers and a floral dress, and both wore Jesus sandals. We noted them, but didn't think much of it other than finding it pretty cool. On that day, I was wearing a black Zildjian symbol t-shirt. A few minutes later, the man turned to me and said, "Hey, I like your shirt. Are you a musician?" I replied, "Yes, I am," and it sparked a conversation. He inquired about the type of music I played and where I performed. I explained that I was a worship musician and we had just moved to the area and were looking for a church. To my surprise, despite his unconventional appearance, he smiled and said, "Really? I'd like to invite you to our church. It's called the River Church, just up the road." He informed us that it was a recently established church that met in a local elementary school. Intrigued, we decided to check it out that Sunday. We felt so welcomed as soon as we walked in that we decided to make it our regular church. The man, whom I affectionately referred to as the hippie man who had invited us, was named Stephen and was the pastor of discipleship. He had a genuine passion for his calling. He introduced me to the works of Francis Schaeffer and Ravi Zacharias and an impressive list of authors who significantly impacted my spiritual journey. Stephen was an extraordinary guitarist, a true virtuoso, but our conversations went far beyond music. He didn't even play guitar with the worship team on Sunday mornings. While I came in with the preconceived notion that I would bring all I had learned from the churches back home to our new location, God had different plans. He transformed my perspective. Pastor Stephen embraced me as I was, recognized my potential, and became the first person to see me as more than just a talented kid. He saw me as a man, engaged in conversations with me like a man, and challenged me as a real man should be challenged. Until then, being a musician had been my primary identity and how I defined myself. Even as a husband, father, and military man, I primarily saw myself as a musician. Stephen's challenges ignited a longing for something more profound within me. It initiated a journey of self-discovery. I began to desire recognition as more than a talented musician. I longed for someone to acknowledge not only me, but specifically the Christ within me, much like Pastor Stephen had done. Remarkably, the security clearance paperwork returned in just a few months, which was nothing short of divine intervention since the typical waiting time for these investigations often exceeded a year or more. Coupled with our overwhelming homesickness and my promise to Sandra, stating that I would take her back once the clearance was granted, I updated my resume and uploaded it to a few job websites. Within approximately a week, I received a job offer that offered a higher salary than anything we had ever encountered in Tampa. The job was as a contractor for U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base. Consequently, in July 2010, we returned to our hometown near Tampa with a new spark and a fresh perspective on God. I took the position of Senior Systems Engineer as a subcontractor to Microsoft on an IT support contract. A few months later, I was promoted to Technical Project Manager to oversee the construction of a new headquarters building. My job was overseeing the project to build and migrate all systems and applications from the old data center to the new one. It was a big job. I averaged 65 hours or more a week for a few years, and once the project was done, I was promoted to lead messaging architect for the entire command. This was an even bigger job. I worked full-day shift hours in Tampa with an area of responsibility, AOR, in the Middle East. I had to be available 24/7. It was very taxing on my sleep, health, and family. After some time, Sandra pulled me aside and said, "Honey, something has got to change." She could see it was killing me and that it was affecting the whole family. It was a hard decision for me to leave because I had progressed into a senior management role and had oversight of some of the most critical systems in the most active command in the military. It was the real deal. At this point, I believed, like many men, that my profession was my identity. In seeking wisdom from the Lord, I realized how much my family and I needed a work-life balance. I submitted my resume to a few job sites and received a job offer from a small government contracting company closer to home. I was familiar with the company and had talked to them a year or so prior about a different position on one of their contracts that they had just won, but it was in the process of being contested at the time and was too much of a risk for me. This time, they had an opening on the corporate side and were looking for a senior system engineer to manage the corporate network. I went through a lengthy interview process and was offered a job, and the commute to the office was a dream commute. We took a pretty substantial pay cut, but at that point, money was not as important to us as it was to stabilize the family. 6 months into my employment, a significant event occurred and my boss was let go. I was asked if I wanted a promotion to director of the department. Already feeling that our family was healing well, I accepted the offer, and the raise was more than I ever made during all those complicated and trying years at U.S. Central Command. The Lord had proven how good He is once again. I'm happy to say that as of the time this was written, I am still working with the same organization and that my work-life balance is indescribable. When we returned home from Charleston, we returned to the big church we attended when we moved away. We tried for a few months to reconnect, but were struggling. I used to think it had changed too much over the few months we were away, but I now realize we had changed. The Lord had made us aware of something, but we couldn't put our finger on it just yet. We started noticing a change in our oldest daughter, Dana. We would take her and drop her off at the youth group, and she was having difficulty connecting because it had grown very large, more than 1,500 kids. When we asked her if she wanted to go, she would say no and act strangely. Other factors weighed into the decision. I won't go into it because I am not trying to imply anything was wrong with the church. We were changing, so it no longer seemed the right fit. Sandra's parents were going to a church just a few minutes up the road from our house, and we had some friends there and tried it a few times. It was quite different and took a while for us to get used to, but our kids connected very well. Our oldest daughter, Dana, was excited about attending the youth group. I was getting involved in the tech team and worship teams. Sandra was making very close friends. It was a good fit. We began attending regularly in April 2011. We grew in our identity there. For me, it started as it always does in the worship team. I also started using my technical skills by helping the tech team. The interesting thing is that up to this point, there had never been an overlap. I always worked a very technical job to support my family. Still, I never used those skills in any of the churches I had attended, other than running sound on occasion or helping set up a church-in-the-box sound system at the church in Charleston. I took to this full steam and found joy in building the tech team infrastructure, eventually taking over the whole tech ministry. It was an exciting time because I managed the tech team while still being an active worship team member. I was now seen as more than just a musician, and I loved it. Throughout the next few years, I was asked if I would be interested in observing the elder board. I spent a few months attending these meetings as a fly on the wall, watching and listening. I was unsure why I was allowed to be in the room. Then one day, I was told thanks for attending these meetings. I was told they were having a meeting that night, but said that I didn't need to be there, as they had some private meetings scheduled that only the elders could attend. It sounded good, and I didn't think much about it. The following month, the same thing happened, and the same happened the next month. Then I was asked to return to the meeting, so I thought, sure, why not? When I walked in this time, though, they had me sit at the table with them instead of off to the side like before. I was shocked when I realized what was going on. I was being considered for eldership in the house. What? I was being interviewed by the men I had been observing and for whom I had gained immense respect. What was I doing here? How did I get here? Every aspect of my life was changing, and I was becoming elevated to leadership in every area of my life. Family, work, tech ministry, worship ministry, and now I am sitting here being considered for this honor. I was still in my 30s and at least 20 years younger than everyone in that room. The interview process was very encouraging. At the next meeting, they asked if I would bring Sandra so that they could interview and evaluate us as a married couple. They told us they had witnessed our faithful servanthood in the house. They saw how we walked together as husband and wife and how we loved and parented our children. They spoke to the leadership qualities that we had demonstrated within the church. A week or so later, we were confirmed by the board. The elder board called out identity over us and said I was now an elder in the church body. It was so overwhelming then, and I told them I didn't know if I wanted this and said I would have to pray about it. That was when the pastor looked me in the eyes like he was staring directly into my soul and said, "That is how we know that you are ready and have been called and elevated to this position in the kingdom." I served the board faithfully for several years, observing how God moves through his people. During this time, I was introduced to a new ministry event. Our pastor wanted all the elders to go through this 3-day fully alive retreat focused on spiritual healing. I hesitated to say yes because I didn't feel like I needed anything addressed then and only went out of obedience. I am so glad I went because it was a powerful experience and was the first time I had witnessed a ministry like this. I witnessed some of the biggest and most formidable men I'd ever seen break down in tears and completely surrender their hearts to the Lord as he moved to break down strongholds in their lives. It was also the first time in all my years in ministry that I learned that I was a child of God and that I should guard my heart. It gave me a toolbox of ministry tools I have used a lot over the years. In the years to come, a series of events led to some hard times, and the enemy was causing friction in the church. I cannot provide details out of love and respect for all involved, but I can say that the Lord elevated me to that position for a particular purpose and time. I have only recently gained this understanding from the Lord. My purpose was to be the moderator of the men on that board. I was the person the Lord charged with maintaining integrity throughout a difficult and painful process. I also know there was a wake of hurt left behind that God has not only mended, but he has also exponentially blessed the relationships of all the individuals involved. As I reflected back on that time, the Lord brought me to the passage James 1:12. "Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him." I can sit here now and write about the experience with peace from the Father above that I did well in his sight, but I could not see it then. In 2018, the long and challenging process that the church went through was resolved, and the Lord called us elsewhere. We were unsure where we were supposed to be. We only knew that our time there was done. A new church was being planted a few miles up the road in Apollo Beach, Florida, from resources entrusted to them by the church we were being called away from, and they had a significant need that we could meet. I met with both pastors and shared with them where the Lord was leading us, and after clearing up a few things, I met with the pastor of our new church again. We met for lunch, and before he said anything, I told him I never wanted to be an elder ever again. I could see that that statement visibly took him aback. He and I had served on that same elder board for several years. We talked for quite some time, and he could see that I was hurting, angry, and confused about what I was supposed to be doing and that I needed to be ministered to. He invited me to attend a new 3-day retreat called Centurions that is focused on identity in Christ. Like before, I said yes out of obedience to my pastor, but honestly did not want to be there. As it happens, all the elders and pastors from the last church were attending the same event on the other side of the same property where I was with all the elders and pastors from the new church. This retreat had elements of healing similar to Fully Alive, which was good, as I had new hurts that needed to be addressed. There was a moment during the retreat when I was so frustrated and angry over everything that had happened that it came out again during one of the ministry sessions. Once again, I told my pastor I never wanted to be an elder. My pastor, a close friend, looked me directly in the eye and calmly asked me, "Dustin, what hurts you so badly?" I was witness to all that happened. He offered some words of encouragement directly to me and then said, "You have associated the hurt you experienced with the title of elder." He then asked if it was just the title or if there was more to it. I didn't know how to answer that. I just said I didn't know, and he told me to head to the woods and seek clarification from the Lord. The extended time in the woods was good for me, and the Lord reminded me of the tools in my toolbox that I received during Fully Alive, and real healing took place. The Lord changed my perspective on life and ministry. Going in, I thought my identity was in being an elder and that it had all been taken away from me. I came out knowing only one thing: I was a child of God and was right where God wanted me to be, and that was enough for me in the place where I was. A few weeks later, my pastor gave me a ministry license and called me Pastor Dustin. Tears just swelled and my heart was softened so much because he found a way to show me that he saw the calling on my life. He saw Christ's calling for me and did it in a way I didn't want to reject. I have tried to serve as well as I can as a pastor, worship leader, technical director, and music director in the church. Once again, the enemy attacked me in a manner I never saw coming. This time, though, the attack came at work. The company I have been working for became victim to a major ransomware cyber attack that significantly impacted the business. It took months to recover. As the head of the department, I had to bear the brunt of the blame. This was a very difficult experience for me, as I have always done my job with excellence. Before this event, my pastor had set up a monthly pastoral council meeting where all the church's pastors would get together once a month for discipleship. I became so distracted with the recovery process at work and the fact that I had lost the confidence of the executive management team at my company that I kept missing the pastoral meetings. I started feeling like I was letting my pastor down, and eventually I called him and said I was sorry, but I could no longer attend these meetings until I got everything stable again. I wasn't sure if I could get things normalized again or if I would have a job anymore. It was a stressful time. Eventually, we recovered operations and I did not lose my job. I took a reputation hit to my career with my company, which was a hard pill to swallow, but I could see the Lord at work in the process. I began to hear the enemy speaking lies to me. He told me I was only asked to be a pastor to appease me. He told me I wasn't worthy of the title, and I started to believe it. He was, however, unsuccessful in trying to convince me that I was not worthy of being a child of God. At the time, I decided not to return to being a part of the pastoral council. It's been a few years since that event. We have continued to serve faithfully in the church. Our middle daughter, Leah, married the pastor's son and is now the worship leader at the church, and I am the music director. It has always been a dream of mine to have land to build a homestead. In 2022, the dream became a reality for us, and we sold our home and purchased a 7-acre property. The property is tucked into a wooded area a few miles out of the congestion of town, with a beautiful creek that splits the middle of the property, a large move-in-ready home, and a few outbuildings for my workshop and storage. Having this space has been such a tremendous blessing to our family. We have had so much fun together working the land, carving paths through the woods, planting fruit trees, building gardens, and raising chickens. Before this, I had encountered the presence of God the most, alone in the quietness of the woods of my retreat experiences, and now he gave me my own woods to be alone with him whenever I wanted. Praise God. A few months into the new property, I got a call from my dad. He said he was getting kicked out of the place he had been staying over a disagreement with his landlord and that he had no place to go. I did not want him to be homeless, but I also knew that my dad had a horrible temper. I was hesitant to let him come and live on the property with us. We had a good relationship growing up, but as he had gotten older, the relationship had become strained because of some poor decisions and an occasional narcissistic personality. I had years of pent-up frustration, and I did not want to allow him to move onto the property because we needed to maintain distance to coexist at this point in life. I knew that having him there might not be healthy for our relationship, and I felt he had no respect for boundaries. In addition, his poor decisions were starting to have a significant and direct financial impact on my household, as we had loaned him a considerable amount of money to help him recover after he fell victim to a financial scam that robbed him of his life savings. It was causing severe dissension and bitterness in my heart. I talked through options with Sandra, and we decided to purchase an RV for him to stay in on the property and have him pay us rent. However, we failed to address the required boundaries adequately. We continued to see evidence of poor decisions and caught him in several lies, trying to cover up or blame someone else for his poor choices. Eventually, there was a huge blow-up in front of my family. It was a shameful moment in my life, and I deeply regret the events of that night. When my dad gets angry, there is a switch that flips inside of him, and it is like a demonic spirit comes upon him. When this happens, he is entirely unable to calm down. My sister and I can see in his eyes that it is no longer our dad, but something else is controlling him. This particular night, our tempers got the best of us, leading to a huge fight. I don't want to go into the full details of the night as it is very personal. Still, I will say that night my father said something I interpreted as very disrespectful to me in front of my wife and kids, and I completely lost my temper and stood up to him like I never had before. As I was yelling for him to get out of my house, I felt the Lord impressing on my heart that if I didn't stop, the demonic spirit of anger that was upon him was going to be transferred to me and be mine to carry. This is not a proud moment in my life. However, it brought awareness of the generational curses that needed to be broken so they were not further passed down my family tree. As I mentioned, my journey toward creating an intentional legacy began at 47. The idea to be intentional came from an unexpected source, social media, in particular, a friend's comment about me on a social media post. I don't recall what the original post was about, but I was in a picture someone had tagged me in. When I saw it, I read through the comments, and my dear friend Alejo, whom I connect with on so many levels, commented, "Any man can be a teacher or a pastor, but not every man can father as Dustin does." That comment spoke to me in so many ways. It connected with my spirit, and I knew it was what the Lord called me to be. It was my real identity. Not only had I been fathering my children, but also the employees who work for me in the ministries that the Lord made me a part of. It really pulled at my heartstrings. I knew it was my real calling, my real identity. Being a military man, I understand the importance of rank and the chain of command. Having worked in the corporate world for as long as I have, I know how important titles are in career progression. Being in church my whole life, I know the significance of eldership in the church and the burden that being a pastor carries. My road to discovering my real identity took me through the rise and fall of every title we hold on to as men. However, none of these titles or positions ever had the impact on me that being called a good father did. A few months later, I attended the funeral of a lifelong friend. His children were very good friends of Sandra's and mine in our youth group years. I was in tears throughout the entire memorial service. Yes, I was saddened by the loss of my friend. But what had me in tears was the way his family and friends talked about him. They truly honored him. His oldest daughter came up and spoke about her daddy, and as she did, she had a slideshow playing in the background with pictures of each of his kids and grandkids. She shared how each of them had a little piece of her daddy in them and spoke not just to him as a man, but to Christ and the love that he displayed. It was so touching, and I cried because that is precisely what I want my kids to say about me when I am called home into eternity. I am not fearful about death because I know where I will spend my eternity, but I have always been saddened at the thought of not being there for my family. I posted this thought on Facebook after the memorial service, and his oldest daughter replied to my post and told me that the very fact that I felt that way meant that I was well on the path. I felt like my heart stopped at that moment. I chose to be intentional from that moment forward, but didn't know how to do it. Sure, I knew I would show more love to all of them, but I knew if I was going to be an influential fatherly figure to my family, friends, and ministries, I needed to seek advice from the original father who created the greatest legacy of all time. And so my quest began. I had so much on my mind. The Lord opened up a door to attend a retreat called Quest. This retreat was 6 days long instead of 3 days like the previous retreats I had participated in. I was familiar with it, as in I knew of its existence, and I also knew that my earlier retreat experiences would not have been possible had the authors not attended Quest. It was at this very retreat where God inspired them to write their impactful ministries. Coincidentally, going into this retreat, I again had some significant hurts and anger in my heart toward my dad. In addition, Sandra and I were butting heads on everything from money to intimacy. I had become so frustrated with work and worship that I did everything possible to stay as busy as possible and take my mind off everything. I needed something, and I needed it now. I jumped at the opportunity to attend this retreat, and for the first time, I wasn't going out of obedience to my pastor. I was seeking it and going because I needed it. I knew the enemy had been attacking my very identity and was trying to stop me from progressing into what I was called to be. The first day, I walked into the woods until I found a peaceful river running through the property. I sat my chair in the shallow water facing the rising sun, took off my shoes, stuck my feet in the brisk water, and started my first devotional. After I finished, I closed my eyes and sat silently as the sun rose and started shining on my face. I resisted the urge to open my eyes and heard rustling in the water before me. As I was sitting there, I started to listen to this quiet voice from deep inside, challenging me. It said, "What are you here for? Are you just going to dip your toes in this water, or are you all in?" Splash! I was floating down the river. I found what I needed. I needed the Lord, and I found him. I am grateful that the Lord opened the door for me to attend. If I could describe the experience, I would say it was quiet, purposeful, powerful, and inspirational. The Lord gave me a clear vision, gave me purpose, and provided me with the inspiration to write this book. I left there with peace in my heart, having passed all my hurts, concerns, and sins to the Lord, wanting him more than ever. He set me on a quest to seek him passionately with all my heart every day. He gave me the tools to know how to seek healing. He gave me the identity to move forward because I will fall back to my past hurts without it. He showed me the importance of the journey and how to build a purposeful, godly legacy. After the retreat, my pastor wanted to meet and discuss my experience. It was the most open, honest, sincere, and easy conversation I had ever had with him. I shared my retreat experience and told him all that the Lord revealed to me, including the vision of this book. He encouraged me to keep writing and questing after the Lord. I apologized for my closed-mindedness toward the eldership and pastorship and told him that the Lord called me to father the ministries I'm involved in, regardless of titles. For the first time, I truly understood what being an elder and a pastor meant. The Lord had called me to be a father in all aspects of my life. I told him that I was willing and open to serve in whatever capacity the Lord called me into, wherever there was a need. A few months later, I received word that I was being invited back into the pastoral council, and this time, I knew in my heart what that meant. I pray that this book inspires you to be purposeful in living a godly life, one that leaves a legacy so powerful that if Jesus spoke about you at your memorial service, he would say, "I know them well,